Hi, and welcome to Ed Talks. My name's Anne Dymond, and I'm a Board of Governors teaching chair here at the University of Lethbridge. The University of Lethbridge is situated on Blackfoot lands, and so I want to start with a traditional Blackfoot greeting, Oki Nitsu Kuawa, which means welcome to our family and friends. It's my pleasure today to be here with Janet Youngdahl, an Associate Professor of Music in the Faculty of Fine Arts. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you.
It's a great honor to be with you to talk about teaching. Normally in academic contexts, we often talk about our research and we talk about where we're trained, but I want to start by asking you about how you got to be teaching here, to talk about your teaching training and your background.
Well, you know, often in music, kind of unlike other disciplines, we come to it from being performers. And so that's for sure the track that I took. I've been a singer for most of my life, and along with that took various academic degrees and then started working professionally as a singer and specialized in early music, so ancient music, medieval music, and Baroque music. And in my doctorate, I did some teaching, some assistantship teaching, and then some hired teaching, and I became really interested in it. And I started questioning how I'd been taught, and I was very surprised that I liked that. And then I emigrated to Canada and assumed I would retire at that point from my professional career, and I didn't retire, and I was asked to teach at U of C. I taught there for 10 years, and I've been down here for 10 years, and I have just found a passion for it, and I've just been so happy teaching down here.
Well, that is lovely. I think it's interesting that you say you started questioning how you were taught, because I think that's something that many of us who are interested in teaching often start with that questioning of our backgrounds.
Right.
And what was it about your background that you maybe questioned?
I think the thing that in music I began to question is that there is this tradition that we've inherited from, I think, several hundred years of people that have a whole lot of passion about what they're doing, but they really have an iron fist when they impart it to others. So we have a tradition of conductors that scream at their orchestras and their singers.
Right.
And we have a tradition of private teachers that, you know, might be terrifying to their students. Their students might, you know, become ill on their way into their lesson because they're so afraid to enter the door to meet with their teachers. That's a tradition in my field. And
it's a tradition that has traumatized many of us.
Yes,
like I wasn't of the generation that was hit with rulers when I played piano, but my older siblings were. So I was of a,
you know all about that. Right, yeah, so I really, once I started doing it, I realized, oh, I don't have to act that way. And that was a real revelation to me. And so I think that started me out in a way that allowed a little more freedom. It's also, you know, partly it's also different being a female in a leadership role in music. That's still not quite as common as being a man, especially in conducting. There aren't as many women conductors, for sure.
Actually, before we get into that too much, could you say a little bit about the different roles you play? Because I know you teach in some quite different areas.
Yeah, my job at the University of Lethbridge is the perfect job for me. It does all my favorite things. I get to conduct the choir here, which is a 50-voice mixed men and women's choir called the University of Lethbridge Singers. And I teach studio voice students, so that means private instruction. Normally I have 8 or 9 students each semester, and I take them for 3 or 4 years. And then I have the early music history teaching course, which is a chance to introduce students to an era they know nothing about from a historical perspective. And I also sometimes teach the second term of conducting.
Wow, so that's quite a disparate body of things.
It's a very different skills, very different things.
Oh, and I hope we'll get to unpack that as we talk. But maybe I want to start with a bigger picture of music, because music itself is a kind of an odd fit as a teacher. It's a very different kind of teacher than I think most people think. When they think of a university, they picture maybe a lecture class, which you might do some of in music history. How do you find that music fits in the university overall? Because it can seem sort of unusual in contemporary worlds.
I think that music serves a special purpose, really, in universities and in communities. And I think that here, particularly, we're very good at helping build a really healthful and useful relationship between the arts and music and specifics at the university. I feel like music has that potential in it to connect students to one another, to connect students to their community, and I think in a way that can build long-term relationships and that can be multi-generational and also can involve many cultures and can be embracing of the climate that your institution is located in. I think it serves in a very unusual role for institutions, and I think that it's a crucial part of helping us listen to one another and learn one another's stories.
Oh, that's lovely. And to me, that recognizing how important citizenship is in this university's mandate, I love the way you've explained it, because it makes it more clear how music is such an important part of developing the whole person, let's call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so now I know you speak, you teach voice in particular, and that to me seems like a very different thing than what I do. So can you tell me about teaching one-on-one in a university context?
It probably is a very different thing than most professors get to do, I would say. I mean, I feel like the best part about it is that I get to build strong individual relationships with students that last for years, and often you keep track of those students for decades. Right. So, you know, like actually next week I have a student coming back to give master classes for us. It was my very first student here, and she went off and got a PhD. Right. And, you know, it has her own teaching job. And so I feel so grateful that I get to kind of follow those paths as they go. So what do? Basically, I spend all day, every day, talking about how to breathe, how to stand, how to integrate your breath with what turns into sound, and what do we want to activate and what do we want to release, and where do we want to let the sound ring more, and what do we want to avoid? We want to avoid uncomfortable, metallic, gritty, grated, painful sounds, right? And so we want to encourage open, spacious, resonant, ringing sounds in the voice that happen easily.
I'm suddenly so self-conscious.
So that's what I do all day long, is I talk to people about, well, how is your posture supporting that? And are you really taking a breath? And maybe when you're breathing, are you holding in your stomach really tightly? So I have those conversations all day long with people.
Right.
That's what I do.
Okay.
And then, in addition to that, we apply that onto music. So we do that process onto musical scores, you know, rhythm and pitch and language. We teach Italian, German, French, and English song every day.
Right.
Right, I have probably 25 dictionaries in my office, and we're constantly looking up words and correcting pronunciation and figuring out what words mean. And
so there's a kind of breadth to that. Yeah. It's about the speaking, but it's about this wider breadth of person, right? Interesting.
Yeah. It's actually, I think it's tremendously fun what I get to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was thinking particularly about the one-on-one teaching, the component of it that seems so different to me from what I do, where you're developing this very intense relationship, and that it's something that's so personal to the student. I mean, I can say, it doesn't matter if you got a B on an art history essay, it's not who you are. But a voice, I imagine that that's a challenge. How do you get around, how do you work with students and their anxieties and the really personal nature of voice?
Yeah. Those are good questions, and there are ones that I think might take a lifetime to figure out how to become good at that. I think that at the core of it, it's very important that people who are given the task of working closely with students have built in a really trusting relationship and keep everything they do completely appropriate. There's a fine line between making sure that we feel like we're being open and honest, and making sure that, you know, I need to carry this conversation and this person's feelings way down the road for years.
Right.
For years, in fact. Right. And so we tread a very careful line of encouragement way beyond where it feels even appropriate. I am encouraging almost every moment.
Right.
I am only discouraging when I feel like someone is not committing fully on a regular basis to their craft, to our work together.
Right. So, I mean, that thing of being demanding
Yes.
is a part of being encouraging, right?
It is a part of it. It is really a part of it. And I think that it's very important for us to hold back our quick judgment. It's important for us to hold back our anger and our impatience. You know, there have been days when I have to leave the office and get a drink of water and come back.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and that is my, you know, students who know me well would know, oh no, she's mad now.
Right. But it's because you're framing it in
That's right.
in being supportive and being
I'm framing
encouraging.
it, I'm remembering that, you know what, this 1 hour is not the whole relationship. This is 1 hour in 4 years of meeting every week.
Right.
And so you've got to keep the long view. And I think that part of that, building that good relationship, really, I'm always remembering that I'm teaching someone who's going to be teaching others.
Right.
And so really, I just think of modeling all the time.
I mean, for me, that relates often to parenthood, right? Where I have
Very
a
much
similar
so.
kind of, okay, I have to
Very
model
much
this
so.
proper behavior because
Very much so, and I think
I have
of
to
that.
control myself.
And I think of that scientific term, that term mimesis. You know that you know, we've learned that if an animal, like if a monkey watches us, you know, put our hand on our head, you know, they're probably going to do that, right? And so honestly, if I come in with a good attitude and smile at that person and have some physical energy, it's very likely that that student is going to pull up a little bit more energy, even if they don't feel like that. So I use that mimesis a lot to kind of move that relationship towards where I think it should go. And I remember that I have options, like I can change the topic whenever I want, at any point. You know, so it's important to dig into things like, how do you feel today? But if it gets into way too much information, I might pull that back and I might, well, how is that block going? You know, did that second movement work out for you? You know? And we might just
reframing the energy.
reframe and move into a whole other topic. And I think maintaining clear boundaries is very important. Yeah, and it's difficult. And I think you learn as you go about how to do that.
Because there's not much training for that kind of one-on-one relationship and appropriate boundaries in the university.
Really isn't. And many of us experienced inappropriate teaching. And so, you know, many of us are in kind of a new realm of, well, how could this be done? How could this be done in a respectful setting? Because maybe I did experience that or maybe I didn't.
And if the boundary isn't created by yelling and anger and distance, that's one way of creating a boundary, right? But if we don't want that as our boundary.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned, you know, it's very much like being a parent. You know, we're both parents and we've shared, you know, a lot of what it means to be a parent and a professor. And there are things that relate, you know, within that. And I do think about that, that guidance and that hands-off. And both are very necessary in that teaching relationship.
That leads me to, I know you've done a project that I'm interested, or you start your course in ways that I'm interested in, because I think you try and ask the students a lot of questions at the outset. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I do. I began realizing that if I didn't know what their goals were on a very deep level, that I actually couldn't help them. So I began having a requirement at the beginning of every year they maintain throughout a 6-month period that they have to reflect on what their short-term goals are, what their long-term goals are, how they feel their weekly work is progressing, how they're overcoming challenges, identifying things that are working really well for them. So I ask them to put that right into their reflections. And that has helped me so much. I find that process builds more strengths and resilience into them as learners, because actually, in essence, learning about your voice as instruments, you mentioned this, that it's very difficult to not think of the voice as being you. sometimes if you can do some reflection, you can realize, okay, my voice is my instrument. It's not me. It's a hard thing to learn. Sometimes reflection can lead you into that area. And help you remember that understanding where I'm at and where I want to get is different than just this voice that I have that I may not particularly be happy with.
I think many profs start the term with a questionnaire. But what you're talking about is different, right? What can you?
So I ask a bunch of questions, kind of like a questionnaire, but I ask them to keep basically a journal, a record that they then return to numerous times in the semester, and that they turn into me a couple of times per semester, and that I read, and that I even comment on. So it's kind of like it's a journal that you don't mind someone reads. Right? And I think it helps our process. I really do. Partly because in voice teaching, we're teaching primarily, I mean, there is that external posture and mouth position stuff, but a lot of it is actually inside. If I'm teaching you, I can't actually look in your mouth and go and see how your larynx is doing. I have to kind of guess about all that from what I see or hear externally. So for me to know more about your internal process always helps me. Yeah, and I think helps them. Yeah, so you're right. So it's more than a questionnaire. It allows them to kind of tell me, like if I hear, wow, I practice for 2 hours every day, and by the end of every time I've lost my voice, I can say, oops, wait a minute, you know what? How about trying to practice for 25 minutes a day instead of 2 hours? So I wouldn't know that unless I read that. And that can help me.
Well, and what about, one of the things I'm interested in as a teacher is trying to create a classroom that's really inclusive, right? And to me, it seems like those reflective pieces might be a way of reaching the different students who are coming in really different, from different backgrounds and different training.
That's a piece that I was so scared of when I first started here, and that I've really come to love now and to feel very proud about. Because it's true, we accept students with all sorts of different backgrounds in music. So some of the folks we bring into our program will have had years, even maybe a decade of music lessons. Some people have never had a private lesson. Some people can play the piano and maybe another instrument. They read music fluently. Many of them come in not being able to read a musical score at all. Yeah, with zero musical reading skills. And
so something that's so core to your discipline.
It's so core.
But they're not coming from high school with that.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah, so that skill has kind of left the premises of public education. And today, with so much recorded music available free online, you could be assigned pieces and go listen to YouTube examples of them, or find on Spotify, or you might never actually have to go to a score and count that out and sing the intervals and work with written material. That might not be something you've ever done. Which
is literacy in your field. It's like being able to hide that you can't actually read.
It is literacy.
In my field.
It is. And there are ways of kind of getting past it and getting through it that may be very hidden. And very covert, and a student may really kind of protect themselves and not show you that they can't read. And so I try to tease that out right away. Partly I work with them in choir so I can hear immediately, can you read a score? But even before that, in the lesson, I actually do have them do some reading for me so I have a sense of, okay, where are your skills with that? And I meet them where they're at, because I just feel like you can't come out of our program, or you shouldn't come out of our program, without having the ability to share what that written music means. So on the piano we have a Bach score over there. It's actually a score we're working on right now, and it's hard. There's so much going on there, and they feel really scared about approaching that kind of music at first. And part of my task is just removing the fear. And reminding them that, if you took a little bit of this music and stretched it out, it's kind of like another melody. It's just a simpler melody. It's just very compact. It's very dense.
So that relates to other kinds of teaching, it seems to me, because you're you're chunking the material, breaking it down into more manageable components, and then trying to help students so that they're all working at the same level or the level they need to be.
Absolutely.
Right?
And trying to make it so that we're not privileging those who've had a bigger background.
Right.
And in fact, it turns out to be that if someone takes a real interest in learning how to read and figures out what skills they need to do to learn that, they may become better than those who had it their whole life.
Right.
It's not impossible.
It's not too late to learn it.
It's not too late, not for anyone.
And conveying that to the students must be really significant.
It is significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important because I think there is this kind of incorrect assumption that music is inborn, you have talent or you don't have talent, especially with singing. There's this idea, well, you can either sing or you can't sing.
Yes.
And, you know, hiding in that is a very amazing truth in that certain people have an unbelievably beautiful setup for singing without any training. It's true.
Right.
They do. Certain people have that.
Some natural ability, sure.
Right. There's just some real gifted ability. But most of us, given enough training and enough experience, can learn to participate in music in many, many ways, even at a very deep level. There's more potential for that than I think people realize.
Right. I think people think of that maybe with, you know, piano. Like I think I could learn to play the piano if I worked at it. Voice does seem a bit more intimidating to me.
Yeah. And I think voice is the place where most of us could be sharing our instruments. I mean, you know, I think about how singing has kind of, you know, left us. I mean, I've read about even in Canada, there were these singing societies where, you know, you would have a singing master to come into your community and you would have 2 weeks of singing school.
Right.
And everyone in the community would meet and you'd sing together every night for 2 weeks.
Right.
And this would happen every year.
Well, and there are subcultures, I think, in our community where singing is still strong, but it might be...
Maybe not at that level, though.
Yeah, I think.
And it's not your whole society. I mean,
it's
everyone went. Everyone went.
Yes.
You know, so really it kind of has left us, and I think that almost everyone can sing.
And why should they?
Why should they? Oh, it's so good for you. It's so good for you. I mean, we know that singers live longer. We know that, oh, yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it keeps you younger. This is partly we use our breath way better.
Right.
Right? It brings oxygen into your skin.
Oh, I think I could use that.
It does. You could, right? All of us could. Singing is very, very good for you. Right. So, you know, there's research now that supports singing being useful for depression, you know, to get people out of depression. Just taking in air and making vocal sound is good for you. It makes sense.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's kind of like internal dancing. You know, think of it that way, right? You know, your body is expressing things that are beautiful.
Right.
And I think people get inspired by that. They get inspired by their own instrument. They get inspired by hearing others. I think singing together is a healing activity,
right?
A potentially important thing that can solve conflicts.
Right. I mean, I know internationally there's all sorts of movements, like the Doctors Without Borders. There's Musicians Without Borders, which I'm interested in, but that's another topic for another day, perhaps. So we focused a lot so far on one-on-one, but you teach in other ways as well, right? So maybe how do you approach teaching differently in the different contexts? Let's say one-on-one versus the choir. What's good teaching in choir versus one-on-one?
Conducting a choir is the place where I've had to most rebuild my own background. Because the conducting that was acceptable when I went to university, we were just screamed at the whole time.
Right.
I mean, the conductor would be jumping up and down and purple in the face and screaming at you.
Okay.
In anger.
I don't think we do stuff like that anymore, right?
We just don't do that anymore, right? That's just not considered good pedagogy. Thank goodness.
Right.
Right? I mean, I'm really glad we're beyond that. I'm glad I get to rebuild that. But I did not have any models of that.
Right.
Right? None. I had no models for that. And I had no female conductors, right? And so I've really had to come to that on my own.
Right.
And I think that it's very challenging to work with a group where you have a great variety of skill level, and yet you want to be able to pull off music that displays the beauty of the voices of those young people. Because boy, do we have beautiful voices here. Right. I mean, it's thrilling, right? I mean, I have a concert in a month and I'm so excited to share the music that we've learned. They have worked so hard at that music, and it's difficult to get them there, but I think that it requires that we're better at what we do. So I noticed that the stronger my skills are, the better their skills are. So the more intimately I know my material, like if I can come in with material that I already have interiorized completely and I basically have a piece memorized, I can teach it in 2 seconds.
Right.
You know, so maybe it's kind of like thinking of a lecture that I've memorized.
Yeah.
It's similar to that. Like that's, you know, we do memorize lectures occasionally, and they go very well.
Right.
And the material is taught very easily.
Yes.
Can I come in every day and do that? Well, do I have the time for that?
Right.
Maybe not.
But I do think that the similarity, like we do get better as we've done it.
We do.
And this, I think students often think that we just know everything and that we're unprepared, but we know that
That's right.
When I look most off the cuff is when I'm most deeply prepared, right? When I've done my homework and I can look like I'm winging it, but actually it's because it's all laid out already in my mind, right?
Right, because you can be more relaxed.
Yes, right, and so they think you just randomly have all the lectures in ancient history.
That's right.
Free at your fingertips or your tongue tip.
I like
right?
that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
It's very true.
Yeah,
it's very, very true.
And I think we get better as we practice the craft of teaching.
That's right. And practicing is a really important word.
Yeah,
it's a really important word.
Yes, I sometimes meet students I had 20 years ago and say, "Oh no, I'm better at it now."
Oh, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. I feel actually sorry for the people that I taught in my first years of teaching.
Those early days, you have a lot of enthusiasm, right?
You do. You're an excited, demanding graduate student. And thankfully we get to go past that.
Right. There's a variety of. It's a balance, right? You also work as a conductor.
Yes.
What's involved in that in terms of teaching?
It's challenging to be a conductor and be also teaching while you're conducting.
Right.
Because you have to think about, how do I get them to produce this material, this sound, yet also be modeling what does it mean to be a good conductor?
Right.
So that's a physicality of gesture.
Right.
And so you have 2 hours that you're basically trying to model really good musicianship as a conductor. At the same time, you're trying to get them to learn music they don't have any clue about.
So you're both teaching them singing while you're doing it and teaching them music literacy in terms of reading the music and modeling how to be a conductor.
That's right. And language and style.
Right.
Right? So it may not be in English. It may have been written 300 years ago.
Right.
So there are all sorts of things that move into that. So it's actually the most challenging thing that I do, truthfully.
Okay. Yeah.
It's working with a large group of people. Here at U of L, our choir meets from 4:30 to 6:30 twice a week, so over the dinner hour. So the students have taught me a new word, and that word is hangry.
Right.
Right? So hungry and angry. And so when I ask them, how are you feeling? And they say, hangry, I know. And, often, it's not the best time for me either.
Right.
Right? So our energy is not at the best at that time of day. But I think that one of the things that is a philosophical change for conductors right now is we've noticed that if you build strong relationships amongst the students, and that feels like someplace they want to go because they want to be with those people and learn from one another. And then also I have strong relationships with each of them individually as well as with them as a unit.
Right.
That changes things. They want to come. They want to come because they love being together.
Well, and I think it also empowers them as learners. Like it's part of a larger philosophy of teaching, of making the student responsible or aware that they've always been responsible for their learning.
That's right. They have always been responsible for it. I also think that there is a way of engaging students in an ensemble where you elicit thought, about what's the mood of this? What are we trying to deliver to our audience?
Right.
What's the feeling we want our listeners to gather after they hear this? And those kind of questions change the way they sing.
Right.
Change the way they realize that there's a purpose to what they're learning, and when they perform that, they do want the listener to come to a certain sensation, either of, real excitement or deep sadness about what that music might share.
Do you mean in an older version you would have told them that?
Yes.
And in more contemporary ways of teaching?
Or in an older version, I actually wouldn't have even talked about the feelings. I would have just had the crescendos and decrescendos, somehow magically elicit that sort of feeling.
Right.
Whereas I think we're moving to a point where we realize that if we can embody that sensation and share that feeling, our listeners grab onto that more readily.
Right. Well, and it goes back to that earlier thing you were talking about, a more reflective practice, right? Which
that's
is
right.
Making our students more reflective, I think is essential. I mean, cross-disciplinary.
It is, and I also feel like we have a task to help maintain hope amongst students and our community. I mean, frankly, we're in a world where there is a need for hope, and I think music has a special task, a special role in building that. Yeah. And I think many times people are drawn to singing that need singing.
Right.
They need it in their lives, and we have to respect that and know how that works for them. But I think that conducting is a very special position to be given to allow yourself to work with a whole group of young people. Right. In a very different way than a lecture allows us to do. So I feel really lucky to get to do that.
Well, I want to go back to early, at the beginning you said you're trying to build relations between them. Are there specifics you can give me? Like, what do you do to facilitate relations between them?
Well, I mean, at a basic level, I make sure that all 50 people know everyone's name.
Okay.
That's not as easy as it sounds, right?
50
I mean, you probably have introductions at the beginning of courses, maybe.
Some courses, not all. Yeah.
Not every course, right? But we do name rounds repetitively.
Right.
So everyone knows everyone's names, and I'll even, jokingly test them on that. Do you know who that is you're sitting next to? We ask silly things about, what kind of animals do you have, and, what's your favorite food, and, what's the thing you miss most about not being at home.
Right.
We
like
try
just humanizing things.
Humanizing things, just to get to know one another. I have people sit with other people all the time.
Right.
So, you're not always sitting next to your same seatmate. That's crucial. I try to mix up skill level. I try to put my newer students right next to a more experienced student.
Right.
I try to make sure they get to know each other. I try to share the wealth, basically.
Yeah.
I try to put my good readers in places where maybe there aren't such good readers around them.
Right.
It's pretty fun that we can kind of move. There's like cells.
Yeah.
You can kind of, and see what happens, see where the energy moves you.
I was teaching a course this term that has 20 students in it, and it's a seminar course, and I didn't break the groups up enough. And it's late enough in the term, so I let it go for sort of like 2 weeks more than I should have.
Right.
And I can feel it in the classroom.
Yes.
They're bonded in small groups, not as a whole class.
Right.
And it's like, I know you feel the difference between a group that's bonded as a totality.
Really do. Yeah. You really do. And for a choir, I think in an instrumental ensemble where you're each carrying a different instrument, it's just not as possible to kind of have those close relationships, partly because you can't move everyone around as much as I can. Right? So, but in a choir, it's essential because our goal is for this unified, blended sound. And it means that you have to let go of your personal, distinctive instrument and figure out, how do I work with your voice? And yours, and yours. And how do we make a unified voice that we are together? That doesn't belong to any one of us. It only exists when we're all giving a small amount.
Right. Now that leads me to a question that I'm not sure about. that's maybe like a stereotype about singers, which is, I mean, singers are sometimes seen as prima donnas is the term that gets applied to them.
Absolutely,
right?
they are.
So there's, I mean, because singing to me, it's interesting because it has some interesting ego questions, right?
Yes.
On the one hand, you do need to teach them to be brave,
Right.
but there's another lesson about our humanity there.
That's right. Yeah, and choir is a moment where we do that. We take these extremely individualistic, very dramatic voices, and we say, well, now you get to sit in a section with half of these people are biology majors. And they come to sing because they are so happy to not be in the lab anymore. Right. And they may have a very different instrument than you have, and you are asked to bring your voice to their level.
Right.
And so you're right, that really means letting go of egotistical things.
Well, and that goes right back to the beginning of this conversation, to the kind of bridging role that music can play in cultures and the growth that it brings you as a human overall, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And if our singers that we've had kind of developing as a solo singer don't know how to work in that group context, they won't be effective in the world.
Right.
You know, I mean, they might be able to go out there and be Pavarotti, and maybe some of them will be, but it's likely they won't be. Right?
Most of us do,
Most of us won't be, right?
what-
Most of us end up working with others, and the opportunity to get to work with others is fantastic. And so choir is an essential skill for singers. It's essential.
Right.
In addition to teaching them much more about listening to one another. Music isn't so much about producing as it is about really good interior listening and fitting into the musical context that you find yourself.
I know you also teach history classes, and that those are similar to the other topics where we've talked about how there was a sort of older model. I gather you've changed your history courses in.
Yeah. You know, I've been so lucky that I've been asked to teach the medieval and Renaissance music history courses here. And I have such a love for it because it's my specialty area. So it's the thing. Actually, that I...
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your background in terms of medieval and Renaissance?
Sure, absolutely.
Because you have a history there.
Yeah, I do. So in my doctorate, I specialized in performance practice, historical performance practice, which means basically the study of music from earlier times. And so
sometimes before we had recordings.
Times before we had recordings.
Right, so you're imagining
You're imagining things based on written scores. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and so I became in love with both medieval and Baroque music. And I came to Canada, actually to UBC for a workshop with a German ensemble named Sequentia. And I did the workshop with them, and soon after that, they hired me to work in Germany with them. And so for 10 years, I did recordings and tours with that ensemble Sequentia, all over the world, and had a great time doing that. And then along the way, I picked up my own Baroque ensemble. So I have another ensemble that I still have, that I've been working with for 20 years, which is made up of a harpsichord player, my friend Vivian, who lives in Boston. And so she and I do several concerts a year still. I'm going out there to Boston to teach a class with her next month. And so we still do that together. And so those musics from earlier periods are really my specialty, and that history course lets me get right in there and play with the materials of early music.
Wait, can I ask a question about if you were a specialist in how early music sounded and you performed that, does it sound different than if someone who wasn't a specialist in that would play it? Yes,
yeah, that's a really good question. So if I was basically an opera singer and I was thrown a medieval score.
Right.
It would sound beautiful. It would sound like opera.
Right.
Right? And there are some key differences to musics of earlier eras, partly in terms of scale. So we know that medieval music was usually performed either with a single voice or with a small group of singers, perhaps with one instrument, maybe two. It was music of a very small scale. There weren't concert halls, there were churches, right, that had very resonant acoustic, and that resonant acoustic means that I can't sing with a huge vibrato.
Okay.
If I sing with an operatic vibrato, the whole church is just going like this.
Okay.
No one can hear anything.
Okay.
Right? So it requires that I have a slender, accurate, detailed, smaller, more focused sound.
Okay. Right. So
that's the big difference.
Okay. So when you're teaching that to students, you're teaching them this thing that's quite far from this moment.
Quite far for them. Yeah, and I don't even teach what I do.
Okay.
I don't even address it at all.
Right.
So in the history course, I decided for the first 5 or 6 years I taught that course, I did it like all the other history professors are doing it. We give lectures and we listen to the recordings that are in the printed music in the books, and we analyze the music and we write on the board, and they go home. And last year I decided that I had to involve performance in the history course. So at the beginning of the term, I found out what everyone plays. And I asked them to give me a list of everything they play, even if they don't play it very well. Like if they play a little bit of recorder or a little bit of guitar or a little bit of harp or anything. Right. So I had this big list in the 40-person class of what they potentially play. And I came up with 25 pieces that they could, and assigned each of them to a piece or two that they would have to learn. So some of this music, I think the oldest music I assigned was from like 1260.
Okay.
That's old.
Right.
Right, that's kind of at the beginning of where we have well-notated music.
Okay.
It often doesn't have any rhythm with it. It might just be pitches. So it has a lot of questions around it.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of answers.
And it's one thing to lecture and say, now this is the questions.
Yeah.
It's another thing to...
That's right, for me to hand you that music and say, here, go.
Figure out what the questions are.
And most of it doesn't have any recordings.
Right.
Right, and so they're just, you know, they come in, how am I supposed to do this? Why did you think I was going to be able to do this?
Right.
I'm like, well...
We'll get there.
What, right, you know, it's that encouragement is thinking, well, what could you do?
Right.
You know, what could you bring improvisational skills to this? Could you bring creativity into this? Might you have to approach this from a different way that you approach your opera arias?
Right, right.
So this is a great bravery-inducing activity for them.
Right. But in a way, it's again similar to the wider pedagogy context, right? For those of us who are interested in good teaching, that, I mean, it's like a flipped classroom, it seems to me. It's put it on you, and then we will come together and reflect on that.
That's right. That's right. So I began with finding one piece for them. So then I guess last year I gave 2, and this year I gave 3, which I think is the perfect thing for the semester. You know, we have these semesters that kind of divide themselves sort of into 3-week groups, I sort of see, and it kind of gives you a chance to be kind of inhabiting a piece for 3 weeks at a time.
Length of time.
And it's become nice. I mean, I have classes where it's a recital. I print up a program, and I hand out beautiful programs. I ask you to dress up, and I ask you to tell about your piece for the class, and then perform it for us.
Right.
And I give them free rein. Last semester, I had a medieval piece performed with 3 electric guitarists and a drum kit and a singer. And I really feel strong about that.
As someone who teaches some medieval history, that is challenging to me.
It's challenging,
yes.
Right.
So, and just in terms of what they've learned there, obviously the instruments are not authentic.
They aren't the same, right? They didn't have electric guitars back then.
But so how is that teaching them about medieval history?
Well, it just takes it off the page.
Right.
You know, so previously they just would have been looking at that score and listening to someone else's interpretation of it. The minute they have to sit down and start dealing with the questions of, well, what's the harmony? I don't know. What do we talk about medieval harmony?
Right.
What might be pitches you could go with that to make harmony? Suddenly they know all about medieval harmony because they had to make some. It doesn't take more than 1 page of music for you to learn medieval harmony if you have to build it yourself.
Right.
Whereas it could take me months and months and months of talking and talking and talking, and you listening while you're falling asleep to some recording, and you still don't get it.
Right. But and again, it goes back to that thing about inclusivity, right? Because it's a way of reaching them with the skills that they have. And that's beautiful.
That's it. And it's been so fun. It's been like, I treasure going to those classes and seeing what they're going to do.
Right.
They really do. And so this semester, in addition to that, I got very brave and I decided to let the students teach half the class. So they give half the lectures in groups. Because the material is all there. It's in a textbook, it's in a music book that's analyzed. Each piece is fully analyzed.
Right.
The information is there.
Right.
They could learn if they would read it. They won't read it. Students don't really like to read very much, especially not a textbook.
Right.
Do they listen to their peers better than to me? Way better. Huh. Do they care more if someone's standing in front of them and is very nervous and is trying to give them information? They're gonna just soak that up and they're gonna support that person. They're gonna listen. They're gonna look at that slide. They're gonna, it's a whole different, like I feel this circle building when they are listening to their peers and trying to help them be brave. So it's changed everything about that course.
Now, from my perspective, that seems a lot like being a conductor.
I hadn't thought of that. You might be right.
But it's the same kinds of things, right? You're building a community in the classroom and making them responsible for that.
I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that. You know, the other thing I love about it is it saves my kind of lecturing for certain kind of choice moments where I really get to like pull in contextual elements that they don't really have access to because they didn't have the background information.
Right. Or make connections between things that they're not quite at the...
That's right. That's right. Or to share research in my field that I think could be drawn in that they're not going to know how to draw in.
Right.
You know, and so I think then those moments where they realize, oh, well, this is how you would pull in outside research into this, you know, discipline is really helpful because I demonstrate that for them. So it kind of builds that skill into knowing how they might write their paper, for instance.
Right.
You know, but I'm not trying to fatigue them with imparting way too much information.
Right. And that's another thing that I think is big in pedagogy literature right now, that sense of scaling back the amount of information so that there's a greater mastery. Does that come up in music too?
I wish it would. We're a little bit old-fashioned in music, and I think we still have that kind of more is better model happening, but I deeply feel like limiting the amount we share makes it more interior, and I think that's a goal for us.
Yeah, and I think it makes you have greater mastery over a smaller number of things and a greater ability to reflect on those things. Although I don't always achieve it myself in my own class. The breadth versus depth, I think, is always really challenging for university teachers. Yeah.
I think partly that investing time in learning and practicing music of a style you don't know anything about kind of gives you that depth. It gives the students that depth. Right, because you can't just look at it once. Look at it multiple times, and to kind of unpack the layers that might be in that, to be able to understand that. So in a way, they're kind of diving deep into small little bits of material. So, you know, ideally, I hope they would come away from that class with a sense that, you know, I think that 13th century music is quite different than 15th century music, and this is why. Like they would have something to say about that, I think, at the end of my course. That they might not have been able to say when I was just giving lectures.
I mean, because they've interiorized it, because they embodied it literally with their playing.
They literally embodied it. Yeah.
Neat. That's great.
It's pretty fun.
One of the things that always amazes me about the music department is how much they do. I mean, everyone in the music department is in the community in so many different ways, and I know you in particular are. Can you tell us a little bit about your work outside the university?
I think that choral music particularly is called upon to serve moments of difficulty. And I think that our choir is no exception to that. So I think that I've tried to get the choir involved in responding to moments of international crisis or hardship or difficulty on a regular basis when these things come up. And they've come up while I've been here for 10 years. There have been a lot of things that have happened. You know, for the Japan tsunami, we ran a large fundraiser concert that I organized, and I think the students became very passionate about becoming involved in that.
Right.
We have participated in several of the Syrian refugee concerts that you have been
also
intimately
interested in,
associated with. One of the first concerts I gave here was when I'd first moved to town. There was this shocking event where the car and home of beloved faculty members were vandalized, and I built a community event around that where the choir and representatives of different faith communities came, and different musicians came and spoke and gave poetry and tried to exert a sense of healing around that moment. And I think that music does offer its community a moment for coming together and trying to offer healing that's not just words.
Right.
And I think it means that we can bring together disparate peoples that may not believe all the same thing, but they feel united around a cause or a sadness or a hardship, that music can begin a process of maybe it's even just a moment of feeling a little bit better about something terribly sad. And I think students are always very lifted up by those moments. And I hope when we do that we're building in a vision for what they might see in their future. You know, what might they be called upon to respond to. Right. I mean, you know, sometimes I have to think, well, is this something I can take on right now? Sometimes it's pure timing. You know, if something happens in the last week of a semester, can I pull together my group? I can't.
Right.
You know, but if there are moments that I can bring them in, I don't know. I think that that's part of the beauty of having music at an institution like this.
Right.
Whereas we have, you know, the government has gifted us with dollars to say that this is valuable enough that we want you to be able to serve your community, both your university community and your community at large. And remember that each student came from a family.
Right.
You know, and so really it's their families, it's their neighbors. It's actually a very wide embrace that we're touching just by these groups that we conduct.
I mean, to me, that's one of the really lovely things about the music department is how much the community comes into the university to experience these young people and their performances, right?
Right.
Right. The faculty and their research as well, but also the...
Yeah. And I think it's one of the times when you're right, the community can say, wow, look at those young people, that is beautiful.
Right.
And, you know, you don't often get to do that. You don't get to say that about a group, you know, that's learning math. Oh, that's so beautiful they're learning math. It is beautiful they're learning math. It's really beautiful.
Yes.
But do we celebrate that?
Yes.
Not as much.
Not in that way.
Not
maybe
in
a different way.
Maybe in a different way.
Well, and we don't get to experience other kinds of academic learning as audience, right? In the way that you do with musicians. One of the things that makes me think of is a phrase you used earlier, that you think your job is to build purposeful relations with young people. Yeah. And I found that I've been thinking about that ever since I heard you say it, because it seems to me to really capture something about, it's the purposeful that is the key there for me. Can you? Yeah,
building purposeful relationships with young people. I do think that's my job. I think that's my task, and I think about that every day.
Right.
And I think about what is ultimately going to further this relationship. And I think about mentoring a lot. Mentoring on the individual level and on the group level and even to a community.
Right.
You know, how can I model what potentially could exist here? I'm sure it could be much better than what I'm doing, but at least it gives you something to bounce off of. You know, it gives you something to kind of place to grow from, maybe.
Right. and to me, I was linking it in a way to that sense of your community work, because the purpose of it is it has to be that sense of connection with other people, or am I?
Yes, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I think that for me, that purposeful relationship is what keeps this respectful and growth oriented.
Right.
What does that look like? Because actually we don't have very many models for that in our world.
Right, of growth and supportive relationships that are about building each other up.
We really don't.
Yeah.
You know, many of us have come from difficult family situations. Many cultural situations are very difficult. You know, we often just don't have models around that.
Or, I mean, even like often things in the university are seen as punitive, right? Like grades are a sense of what you didn't do, rather than the building
elevation. Yeah, I think a lot about how to get elevated. What does that mean? You know, what does that mean to grow up, and to grow? You're right, and I avoid that punitive nature of grading, and I think that it doesn't help us.
Right.
I think there might be another vision beyond where our current thinking is about grading. I think that actually doesn't really help us get further along. I think there might be another way to do that.
Well, and it might relate back to the reflection again, really, because it's about the sense of the students' sense of their own accomplishment, right? Them being the drivers of their education seems so important.
Very much. I like that, drivers of their own education, very much. You know, one of the things I say to my students all the time, my voice students, is I say, you know, no one ever taught anybody else how to sing. People teach themselves how to sing.
Right.
So anything I teach you, you need to take home and your practice room, and you need to kind of figure that out and figure out how to teach yourself that technique. And once they start doing that, they have extraordinary success.
Right.
It's kind of shocking, actually, once someone starts teaching themselves.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Okay, now can we link that to the community sense as well? Because to me it must seem like it's a bit of a staged process, that at first it must be about you. Right, that there's this interior voice.
Right.
And it must take longer until it becomes about something out there. I don't know, is that true?
Maybe. I mean, maybe it's just, you know, kind of following through on what your internal energy can bear.
Right.
You know, and what your voice says, no, I have to speak to this. I have to speak to this, and the way that I can speak to this most effectively is with these 50 lovely people who's going to come into the community and share their lovely music with you and comment on this deep sadness and see if we can create some healing there. It's a different kind of medicine. And music is a medicine. It's just a different kind. It's a kind that knits it through sound, through space, through time, through a moment where you're just listening, you're not talking. You know, even just having that moment of listening is so important.
Right. And that shared experience that is in your body, not your mind.
That's right.
For the audience.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that is lovely. And
Thank you.
It seems like a great place to end.